Hello and welcome to the OTB channel. They do say that knowledge is power, and that's certainly true when it comes to monitoring or troubleshooting your system. Now in Linux, many of us use the command line to do this, but the point is you don't have to. You can use a whole range of GUI tools. This is what this video is about. See you after the intro. Okay, welcome back. I hope everybody's doing okay and that you're all well in this strange environment that we're living under at the moment. But now to the video. I have been thinking a little bit about new users coming to Linux, or what I call Linux tourists, those people who are trying it out perhaps in a virtual machine for the first time, and what their first impressions might be. And one of the things that struck me is if you look on many forums and you watch a lot of YouTube videos, you'd be forgiven for thinking that you have to be a bit of a command line expert to run Linux effectively. The truth is, that couldn't be further from what's actually required. The vast majority of computer users are not technically inclined and just want to get on with the job. And if you're new to Linux, the chances are you're not going to know the command line anyway. That doesn't mean that you don't have an understanding of how to manage and troubleshoot a system, but you won't be able to do it from the CLI. I remember when I first started Linux, and it was like a different language, and I really wish there was some useful GUI tools that I could use to find some basic information. Because if something goes wrong, even if you go on a forum, you're going to be asked, what chipset has that wireless card got? Or what have you tried so far? What is such and such a command saying? Or you're just going to need to know, what was the error message that was generated? Why won't this particular application launch? Before you can even start to do your research and find out a little bit more. So this morning I thought to myself, it might be quite interesting to have a look at what we actually have available in Linux for people who perhaps are not familiar with the command line or would just prefer to use GUI tools. And it took me about an hour. I'm on my Arch system. I managed to install everything from the standard Pacman repos or the AUR. But most of these tools will be available on the vast majority of distros. And some of the tools that I found are really quite useful. So without further ado, let's go and have a look at the first one. So let's start off with a really simple package that gives you some basic information. Many Windows users will be familiar with an app called CPUX. And you might think that's what you're seeing on the screen now. Well, it's not. It's actually something called CPUX. It's actually made by Xorg. That's the site that it's produced from, and it gives you much the same information as you'd get from CPUX. What I'll do to start off with, I'm going to start the daemon, enter my password, and it should relaunch. And you can see straight away, if you need information about your processor, you can see mine is an Intel processor, an i5-7260U CPU. It's the Kaby Lake chipset, and all the various instruction sets are listed there. You can look at the cache, you can look at the motherboard and check what your BIOS version is. You can have a look at what memory you've currently got installed. And you've got an overview of the system there, including what kernel version you're running, what your uptime is, what the compiler is, and the memory that you're actually using. You can even see what your graphics chipset is. As you can see, I'm on an Intel NUC, so mine is just Iris plus graphics. And it even has the ability here to run some basic benchmarking tests. So CPUX, it's a nice, simple system information application, very similar to CPU-Z. So CPUX is a really basic utility which will just give you an overview of what your system is. Most of the time, though, you're going to need something a little bit more complex. And one of the questions that I've been asked again and again, and I see being asked again and again, is why doesn't Linux have a device manager, just like in Windows? Well, the good news is it does. We have commands such as lshw that we can use our terminal to explore exactly what's on our system, but there's also a GUI app here called Hardinfo, which is laid out in much the same way as you'd find the Windows Device Manager. You can see you've got a summary here. You've got the operating system. It refreshes each time it goes off to find information. It'll tell us the operating system we're on. It'll tell us what kernel modules are currently loaded, what file systems we've got mounted at the moment, what our environment variables are, the display, the processor, what memory we've got installed, what our GPU is, and importantly, it will list our PCI and USB devices. Now, I appreciate from the CLI people out there that they'll just say, why not use LSPCI and LSUSB? Well, yes, you could, but this gives you a nice little graphical overview of exactly what your system has. So looking at PCI interfaces here, I can go all the way down here and click on my wireless card, and I can see exactly what the details of that are. So it's 8265/8275. It's also running the IWL Wi-Fi driver. So I know what module's been installed, what module it's currently running with, and exactly the same situation if you go and have a look at your USB devices. So, great. Printers. There we are. It's got the printer that I'm using. Battery, if you're running on a laptop. Your sensors, your storage. And if you want, you can even run a whole range of benchmarks. What this is particularly useful for, though, is you can view just certain parts. So if I just wanted to view my display, I can go straight to it. If I wanted to perhaps generate a report, that's also possible. And I decide what I want the report to be generated on. So let me just say I just want a report on my network. You click generate and it will produce either an HTML file for you or a plain text file. And it'll output to wherever you want it to output, and then you can read it in a web browser. Really useful information. So, Hardinfo is the Linux version of the Windows Device Manager, and yes, most of this information can be obtained really easily on the command line, but if you would prefer just to see exactly what's attached to your system, Hardinfo will give you that information straight away. So if you want information about your hardware and what devices you've got connected to your system, CPUX and Hardinfo can certainly help. But what about if you're looking at networking? You perhaps have a network issue. Well, I found another tool this morning called Nutty, which is apparently developed for the elementary OS, but it's also available for other distributions. It was available in the AUR, and I believe it's also available as a PPA for Ubuntu systems and also for OpenSUSE. So let's go and have a look and see what that's all about. Now, initially, when you start Nutty, and I love the name, you don't see a great deal until you select the connection that you're actually using. So I'm using wireless. If I select that, it will give me some basic information, such as what's my MAC address and what's my internal IP address and my IPv6 address. And what's the state of the interface? Is it up or down? Now, if I view details, it also gives me a whole range of information. So I can look at the product itself. I can look at the configuration, including the driver that it's using. I can have a look at its capabilities and also what resources it's using. The great thing is that if I want to save that information, I simply go to the little settings icon on the top and I export that to a file, and it exports it in a straightforward CSV format like this, and this is what you get. If you're anything like me, it's great looking for information in a GUI or on the command line, but I often want a text file or a CSV file just to save the information for reference, and that's what you get with this. But you can do more. You can also look at the current usage. So let's set my wireless connection again. And it's looking at, what data's been sent, what data's been received today. Click refresh to see current apps. Well, interestingly enough, I haven't got a refresh button on here. So that might be something that's... unless it's up here. Now, I haven't got any refresh, so let me just see if I select that connection again. For some reason, refresh doesn't seem to be producing anything unless I just hit F5. Okay, so it's giving me some basic information. What about speed? Well, it will run a command called traceroute, and if I want to map the route to say google.com, I can do that, and you can see all the hops along the way. Really useful. What about ports? If I want to see all of my open ports at the moment and what's actually using those ports, I can see them at a glance. It makes you realize just how many ports Chromium uses. But you can see pulse audio, polybar, pipewire, everything that's using a port at the moment. And I can even look at the other devices on my network. And there's a whole range of things here, and I'm going to switch back from that pretty quickly. You can also click on Preferences, and you can ask it to monitor every 15 minutes, every 30 minutes, every hour, or once a day. So you can set it up to do background device monitoring. And before I finish talking about Nutty, I've just realised that my not being able to refresh the usage page was my fault. There is a little refresh button on the right-hand side that I completely failed to see. So if I click on that, it asks for my password. Okay. Oh, it's still working, I see. So we'll wait for it to come out. It's telling me that currently I'm using Chromium on the internet, and that's how much data I've sent, and that's how much I've received. Okay, so just one app according to that that's using the internet at the moment. So Nutty, another really useful tool that can replace some commands that you would otherwise put into the terminal. So that's hardware information and networking covered with GUIs. What about moving on to look at processes and perhaps some more general system monitoring information. Well, this is where I came across what I think has to be my favourite app. And it's an app called Stacer. And you'll see in front of you the web page there. And Stacer is a system optimizer and monitor. It's available for Ubuntu. There's a PPA for it, but you can also download it for Debian and Fedora, and you can of course build from source, and it is available in the AUR for Arch, so it's pretty widely available, and it has a whole range of things here, and I'll move on to the app in a second. One of the things I have noticed though is if you're using an app-based system, I think it has a few more options for managing your repositories and managing the Unity or the GNOME window manager and looking at your appearance. But generally speaking, it's still incredibly useful, even under Arch. Let me show you what it looks like. So this is what you'll see when you first launch it, and you get a really polished view of your CPU, the memory, and the disk use. So basic system information, some of which we've already seen in some of the other apps that we've looked at. As you move down the menu, startup applications, well, at the moment it's not listing any startup applications, but if we wanted to add some, we can simply click on that and add the name. So all good. It also has a cleaner here, so we can clean the package caches, crash reports, application logs, application caches, and empty our trash bin. So if you click on one of these little tick boxes here and click the search, it's coming up with a range of things that could be cleared. So let me just have a look at the trash can. Have I got anything in that? I probably have. Let me just clear that. Great. It's as simple as that. So it's like an automatic cleaning app. So this is essential for maintenance, really. What do we go to next? It allows you to browse and search files, directories, and symbolic links. And this is the thing that I find really useful. Many systems now have moved on to System D. And when we were back on System 5 or System V, whatever you want to call it, run level editors were 2 a penny. Not so much initially with System D, but this shows us all of our system services, whether they're currently running and whether they're running on boot. And we can have a look at which are enabled to start up on boot, which are currently disabled, and what the running status is of the various system units that we've got running. So I think that's incredibly useful. Can we get any more information from here? No, it's a case of you can enable them, disable them, or stop them, which is useful in itself. What have we got next? Right. Now, many of you will already have some form of Process Explorer built into full desktop environments. So the GNOME System Monitor, the Mate System Monitor, etc., etc. But if you're not using a full desktop environment, you might rely on something like HTOP. This is a prettier version of HTOP. It shows you all the processes that are running, and it also gives you the option, if you wish, to end a process. So you can see what's taken up the vast majority of your CPU. In this case, I can see it's OBS. An uninstaller. Okay, so lists all the apps on your system, and you can easily uninstall from here. And it gives you an overview of what your CPUs are doing, history of CPU load averages, history of disk writes, history of memory, history of network. Okay, it's pretty. Manage your hosts and host names, and you can also have a look at various disks, set it to auto start, what you want your start page to be. And just generally speaking, it's a really polished app, and you can see a lot of information just by using this. So that's hardware information, networking, and process management covered with a GUI in Linux. If you're troubleshooting, though, there will always be an occasion where if you go on a forum or somewhere else, people will ask you, what's in the log? Well, there are a range of different log viewers out there. My favourite is actually KSystemLog. So let's just briefly look at that. You can see that on the screen in front of you. I like this because I think it's one of the most flexible. I don't run KDE Plasma, but I do use this app. And it allows you to see, well, the kernel log, the Xorg log, or the journal log, which is particularly important with systemd. And you can select which warnings, notices, or errors that you want to see. So if you're looking for an error somewhere, you just highlight that and search. And if you want to look perhaps at a particular device or particular unit and what it's doing, you can select that as well. Let me just click outside that. Or perhaps you want to look at the systemd identifier. It saves you going in and tailing a specific log or using the journal CTL command. And at the end of the day, yes, you may find this a huge amount of information to take in, but if you're troubleshooting a system, looking at the logs is going to be one of the prime things that you need to do. So if information is power, in Linux, you've not only got the command line that can provide you with that information, you've got a whole range of GUI tools that can help you to do it. Now, there are many alternatives. The 5 that I've looked at are 5 that I searched for and sourced this morning. So there may be better alternatives that you use. However, I thought the 5 that I've pointed out today could be quite useful. The command line, of course, is always going to be the preferred option for people who are familiar with it and know the commands, because it's likely to be faster and you're not going to get the sort of information overload that you can get in the likes of KSystemLog. But for somebody who prefers working for a GUI, it's a viable alternative. Now, it has to be said that the information that these GUIs provide you with is going to be a starting point. And if you don't understand that information from the word go, well, it's probably not going to give you anything useful. So you do need still to understand what these GUI tools are producing. However, they can often help you troubleshoot a system. And I was quite surprised. Because I've used Linux for so many years, I've become familiar with a lot of commands, and I personally tend to use the command line when I'm troubleshooting or managing. But I'm quite impressed with Stacer in particular. I thought that was really quite impressive. I know it's been reviewed in the past. I came across it today by accident. So you have alternatives, and that's what Linux is all about. And for those who put forward the argument that the trouble with Linux is you have to use the command line, I think we've got some evidence here that that isn't necessarily so. That's it for today, guys. Just a quick look at a few tools. Don't forget you can join me on LBRY, and I've also started the OldTechBloke Facebook group. But for now, have a great day.